One Friday morning in 2009 in Surrey, England, a body was found inside of a wheelie bin. The rubbish men were just doing their job. They were coming along to take wheelie bins, putting them into the back of their lorries and driving off. But they came across this one wheelie bin which was extremely heavy, and they refused to actually take it. They just said, no, it's too heavy, we're not going to take it, and they carried on to the next house. 3 weeks later, the landlord actually came by and he discovered a human foot hanging out of the wheelie bin. This is the shocking true story of Melanie Warner, a 30-year-old female who was discovered inside of a wheelie bin. This true story will send shivers down your body, so make sure you watch to the very end and hit subscribe if you want to see more true crime videos. Melanie Warner was a 30-year-old South African female, and she was dating a guy called Peter, who was actually German. Melanie and Peter started dating very quickly after they both met. They both were fond of each other. They both kind of fell for each other really, really fast. They both thought that each one was perfect for each other. And in fact, they actually got married very quickly after they started dating. On the outside, this marriage was perfect. No one knew there was any real issues in this marriage. But in fact, the marriage wasn't perfect. If anything, it was far from perfect, because Peter had allegedly had many affairs on Melanie, and multiple times he kept seeing other women all the time behind Melanie's back. And at first she had no idea about it, but it became so frequent that actually Melanie did find out about one of his recent affairs. In 2006, Melanie actually confronted Peter about one of his recent affairs. They had a huge argument about this affair. Peter was denying everything, and Melanie was confident that she found out about this affair. She was arguing, and they were arguing together for ages, all day long, and nothing really came of it. Peter wasn't agreeing to it, Melanie wasn't backing down, so she decided to go and get some rest. She went back to her bed and put a sleep mask on so she could just kind of forget about it and get some rest, because she was really stressed about this current affair she just found out about. At this point, this is where this story instantly gets crazy, and again, this is very shocking, but whilst Melanie was actually asleep in her bed, Peter must have been so angry that he was accused of having an affair that while she was asleep with her sleeping mask on, he actually came up to her while she was in bed with a griddle pan and actually whacked her around the head while she was asleep. This pan was extremely heavy and did some serious damage to Melanie. But not only that, he then got a plastic bag, put it over Melanie's head, and then put her body in a sleeping bag so no one would know where she was. So at this point, he's just killed his wife with a griddle pan. He's panicking because he doesn't want to get caught with this. You know, he wants to get away with this. He doesn't want anyone to know. He's just put his wife's body in a sleeping bag, and he's just hit her around the head with a griddle pan. Obviously, he's been angry about being accused of having an affair. That's why he's done this. And now he's really starting to panic of where he should put her body and what's he gonna do, which is where this story gets even more twisted. Peter actually went online and ordered a large lockable freezer where he was going to actually plan on keeping Melanie's body in, so the body would stay in one type of place and wouldn't send off smells. Buying a big enough freezer so he could freeze her body so no one would know where she was and she was frozen. Now, of course, neighbors are going to wonder where Melanie is gone. They're going to realize she's not around them more, and a lot of people are going to start questioning where Melanie is gone. So Peter actually thought of a plan to go and tell his neighbors that, do you know what, they split up and she's left the country and they're not really going to see her around no more. That was one of the first things he did after he obviously murdered his wife. He went to his neighbors' houses and just made them aware that they're not going to see Melanie around anymore and she's left the country. That is what he told all of his neighbors. Now, he told his neighbors that Melanie was out of the country and they split up, but he told her friends and her family that she actually had a freak accident, and he tried everything he could do to save her. He tried CPR and nothing was working. So he's told neighbor one thing and then told his friends and family completely different. At this point, Peter was panicking. He didn't know what to tell anyone else. Melanie's family and parents actually were coming back to the UK, or tried coming back to the UK for obviously their daughter's funeral, but Peter had something different in mind. Peter told them not to come to the funeral, and in fact he was actually going to go to them to prove that their daughter had passed away. In fact, what he did was fly out to South Africa to meet Melanie's parents and took an urn with him and told them that she'd been cremated and that she's gone. But this is just crazy because the urn wasn't Melanie. The urn was actually just ash from his barbecue. This story is just sickening and gets even worse from this point onwards. Time went on and Peter carried on living his life. He actually had over 3 years of getting away with this. He carried on, went back to his normal life. I assume he started dating other people, he carried on with his work, he carried on doing everything in his normal life. After he just murdered his wife, his family now are aware and think she's been cremated. Everyone kind of turned weirdly a blind eye to this, like no one really questioned anything. In fact, for 3 years straight, no one really knew. But obviously Peter still had her body in the house and needed to do something. And what he did next is sickening. He wanted to move out of this property, but he had a big package which he needed to get rid of, which was obviously Melanie's body. So he decided to actually put this body into the wheelie bin outside of his house. Melanie's body was under this house for over 3 years, and Peter was just praying that if he put this body inside of a wheelie bin, that the bin men would come along as normal, doing their daily routine, and take the body and put it into a landfill, and that would be it. He'd be hands off with the body. No one would ever find out ever again. This went on for 3 years. He kept this body for 3 years and froze it, and decided when he wanted to move out, now was the time to get rid of it, and that was how he did it. He put it in the wheelie bin and prayed that it would get removed. But it didn't get removed, and this is actually what happened. The bin men came along doing their normal routine, doing the bins of the neighborhood, and they refused to take the bin. They refused to take the bin because it was so heavy. They tried putting it, but it was just ridiculously heavy, and they didn't have enough time to mess around with bins that were too heavy. So it actually then took 3 weeks after Peter had moved out for the body to be discovered. So not only was the body then in a wheelie bin for 3 weeks, it actually was found by the landlord, who came along 3 weeks later and found Melanie's foot inside of the wheelie bin hanging out. After the body was discovered, obviously the landlord rang the police. The police came along and investigated everything. Keep in mind this was 3 years later, and their first suspect was obviously the partner, Peter. So they went to Peter and kind of questioned him, and he didn't deny it. He actually said it was self-defense. But Peter forgot one major element of self-defense, and that was Melanie actually had a sleeping mask on. So that proved that Peter wasn't acting in self-defense, and Melanie was asleep and was out of her body. He didn't take the sleep mask off of her. He actually left it on the body, and when the police discovered the body, they would have realized that she was asleep in this at the moment that she passed away, and there was no way she was fighting towards Peter. So Peter completely messed up his story and found out straight away that he was lying. When this case obviously went to jury, Peter claimed that he lost the plot and he was acting in self-defense because Melanie hit him with a rolling pin, and he accidentally acted in self-defense and lost the plot, and he claimed it was manslaughter, not murder. After a very tiring court case for Melanie's family and also a long case in general, Peter was found guilty of murder and now has life in jail. This truly is a shocking story of Melanie Warner and how she was for 3 years frozen, and then the way she was left this world was inside of a wheelie bin. Is really disturbing, and I really, my heart does go out for the family. In 2008, a 21-year-old mother to 2 young boys was kidnapped in her own house in broad daylight, taken into the back of a car, and she was on the phone to the police for over an hour begging to stay alive. This is a true story of Denise Lee, and you need to watch it to the very end because this will send shivers down your body. On January 17th, 2008, Denise was at home with her 2 children. She had 2 little boys, and her husband was at work, and she was just looking after her children like a normal day, you know, looking after her throughout the day whilst her husband went to work. And what happened to Denise this day was really, really shocking. A man who goes by the name of Michael Lee King actually drove to Denise's house, kidnapped Denise in broad daylight, whilst he put her in the back of his car, tied her up, and left her 2 children, her 2 sons, at home completely on their own without anybody knowing. The 2 young children were at home alone for hours because her husband clearly wasn't aware of what's just happened. Denise has just been kidnapped. She's in the back of this car. It was a green Camaro, and she's been driven off and kidnapped and abducted in broad daylight, whilst the children had to stay at home completely on their own, not knowing where their mother's gone. Nathan Lee, who is the husband to Denise Lee, came home from work hours later and found his 2 children completely on their own at home. he started panicking, wondering, where is Denise? Like, why is she not here looking after the kids? And he really started worrying straight away, so he got straight on the phone to the police, rang 911 and made a missing report straight away. Shortly after Nathan Lee rang the police actually got a phone call coming, and they didn't know who this was at first, but the phone call was actually from Denise Lee, and she'd managed to ring the police while she was in the back of this car, the green Camaro that Michael King has just kidnapped her in. She managed to take her phone with her, and she's managed to ring 911 while she's in the back of this car, and it was a very frightening phone call, and she is heard fighting for her life. Now obviously she's in the back of this car from Michael King's car, and she's on the phone to 911, so she didn't want to make Michael know that she was actually on the phone to the police. So what she did was talk third person as if she was actually talking to Michael. So she was talking to the operator, the police operators on the phone in third person, almost like she's actually speaking to Michael, but trying to give hints to the police that she's in danger. Within a few minutes of the phone call starting, the police operators actually knew straight away what was going on here, and they kind of cooperated with Denise in a smart way. They both were talking in ways to kind of communicate without actually giving clues away to Michael that she was on the phone to the 911 operator. One of the questions the operator asked Denise was, "Do you know this guy?" She replied by saying, "No, I don't know you. Why are you taking me? Take me home." That was what she replied to the police operator, but Michael thought that was to him, obviously the driver, the kidnapper. So she was talking in a third person to make it seem like she was talking to the kidnapper, but in reality she's still answering the questions of the operator. So she was being very smart. At one point the operator did actually say to Denise on the phone that the radio in the car, Michael's radio, was too loud and she needs to turn it down so the police can hear what's going on. So Denise thought of a clever way of asking Michael to turn the radio down without making it suspicious that she was on the phone. So what she said was really smart. She said to Michael, "Hey, can you turn the radio down? At least hear me out before you take me away." She said that to kind of make the police know that she's asked Michael, and Michael did in fact actually turn the radio down. So he was falling for all of this, and Denise was being very smart, and she was being very clever in this scenario to try and get the police to help her. But it was no good, because at the end, Michael actually finally realized that she was on the phone to the police, and then things went abrupt really fast. The kidnapper, Michael, realized she was on the phone to obviously the police, so he abruptly ended the call, and this is where the story then starts to go crazy and really disturbing, so prepare yourself. 3 hours later, another phone call came into the police. It wasn't Denise, it wasn't her husband, and it wasn't a kidnapper. In fact, it was a teenage girl who has a crucial lead on this case.
Police emergency, operator Von Hill.
I just got a call from my dad, and his cousin came over his house. He borrowed a shovel and the gas tank with a girl in the car, and she was tied up. And the girl got out of the car, and my dad's cousin went and put her back in the car.
What's the cousin's name?
Mikey King.
Michael King. And what does he look like?
I just know he has dark hair, he's white, kind of chubby.
What's the cousin driving?
A green Camaro.
After this teenager has told the police his car, where he lives, the police instantly rush straight to Michael King's house on the hope that he has taken Denise there. So they went straight there, they sent loads of patrol straight to his house. They were going really fast, and they actually did get to the house where Michael lived. Once they get to the house, they go inside and they actually find duct tape on the floor with brown hair on it. They have reasons to believe that Denise is in this house, so they continue to search the house, but it seemed empty. There was nothing really inside this house. Although there was duct tape with pretty much her hair, what it's supposed to be, on the floor, that it looked like he's duct taped Denise's mouth and taken her away again, they couldn't find her in this house. They then continue searching for Michael's car, because the teenager told the police that he has a green Camaro. So they tried leaving the house looking for his car around the area, and there was just no luck. They just couldn't find anything. Until they had one more final phone call come to the police. This phone call changes everything in this case.
911, where's your emergency?
Well, I'm on 41 going south, and I was at a stoplight, and a man pulled up next to me, and like a Camaro, and they were screaming in the car. Like screaming, like, get me out of here, scream. It's a dark, like, Camaro, like in the 90s or early 2000s or something. And I turned to look at him, and he's a white male, sort of light-colored hair, sort of plump. But I think that he saw me look at him, and I'm not trying to be overdramatic here, but something's going on, because he's even going even slower now.
It was from a woman who was in traffic and she was concerned about the person next to her in a green Camaro. He was acting very suspicious and was looking weird. When he drove off, she rang the police straight away and started following this green Camaro. The driver continues following Michael, but unfortunately she actually lost where he went. He got lost in traffic, so she couldn't continue following him. But the police made a crucial mistake, which actually could have solved this case and prevented the bad from happening. When the police logged the phone call, they actually logged it wrong. They logged the wrong address where the phone call was made from, which was crucial because that was exactly where Michael was. If they could have went to that exact location faster, they could have prevented anything bad from happening. But they logged the wrong address and they went to the wrong address, and it's very sad because that could have saved Denise's life. Finally, they did find Michael and they found his car. They found him, they arrested him, and they had no sign of Denise. She wasn't anywhere to be seen. They started searching his car. She was not in the car. But there was a ring left in the boot. Now this ring was a promise ring from Denise to her husband. And apparently her husband reckons that she left the ring in the boot because it was such a specific ring that only her husband would know of the ring. So apparently her husband reckons that she left that ring in that boot because when this case comes out, he would know that that was Denise in the back of that car because of the ring. Sadly, later authorities actually found Denise's body and she was buried just by where he was actually pulled over. It seems like just moments before, even potentially a couple of minutes before, up to an hour, was when it actually happened. He took her into the woods, what it seems like, in a remote area. Apparently he shot her and then buried her. The police believe that he did take Denise back to his house. He duct taped her, he assaulted her, he did SB to her, he did a lot of things to her which are just gruesome and horrible, after finally then putting her back in the car and taking her to the remote area, which is where he shot her and then buried her. The most horrifying part about this whole story is if they did log that one call correctly, they could have potentially have saved Denise's life. Now, of course, it's human error, mistakes happen, but it's just very sad to know that that one potential phone call from the lady who was in traffic with Michael King next to her could have saved potentially Denise's life. And it's just very sad that that wasn't the case, and it was too late by the time the police finally found Michael King. He had already done what he wanted to do. After Michael King was arrested, he was found guilty of first-degree murder and SB, and he was sentenced to the death penalty. This true story is shocking and really is saddening. My thoughts go out to the family. I really wish the police could have potentially got there quicker and potentially saved her life. In 2018, a 21-year-old male took a 13-year-old teenage girl hostage after killing her mum and her dad and then hiding her under his bed for nearly 3 months. And what happened next is going to send shivers down your spine, so make sure you watch the very end of this story. And if you're a fan of mysterious dark stories, make sure you subscribe and turn on post notifications, as that's all I do on this channel. Jayme Closs was born on July 13th, 2005 and was the only child of James and Denise Closs. On October the 5th, 2018, a male by the name of Jake Patterson decided to drive to Jayme Closs's house on the pure intention of trying to kidnap this 13-year-old girl. He drove all the way to this little girl's house and had full intentions of trying to kidnap this teenage girl and take him to wherever he wanted to go. When he arrived at the house, he saw there was a lot of activity going on within the house and around the area, and he realized that if he was going to do it right now, he probably would have witnesses around to see what's going on. So he decided that he wasn't going to do it today, and he'd come back for a second night to try and attempt it again. 2 days later, on October the 7th, he came back again to Jayme Closs's house, waited outside for a little bit and realized it was exactly the same scenario. There was a lot of people around, a lot of rotation, and there would be witnesses if there was going to be an abduction that he's just about to commit. So he went home and started planning an attack of what he's going to do for the 3rd attempt. So the 3rd attempt, on the 3rd night, he came back on October the 15th, but this time he didn't just come solo-handed. He came with a shotgun, and his full intentions was to go into that house and get Jayme Closs out of that house so he could kidnap this 13-year-old girl. Shortly before 12:53 a.m., he parked his car on the end of the driveway. He was wearing a ski mask and a black coat, and he started walking up to the door of Jayme Closs's house. He was also carrying his shotgun with him, ready to act. As he was walking up the path to the door, the 56-year-old James Closs, the father of Jayme Closs, realized someone was walking up to his house. So he got his flashlight out and shined it through a glass panel at obviously James Patterson and asked him to show his badge. James, obviously realizing this guy, James Patterson, had a shotgun with him, so he wanted to reveal his identity and his card to ask why he's here. He thought he was most likely going to be the police. James Closs refused to open the door because he wasn't identifying himself, so James Patterson decided to start swearing and shouting, "Open the effing door now!" And James Closs was having none of it. He wasn't opening this door, he wasn't going to let this stranger into his house, so he just kind of ignored him and hoped he would go away. A few moments later, sadly, James Patterson got his shotgun out and shot straight through the door, instantly killing James Closs within one shot. After James Patterson shot James Closs, he went inside the house and closed the door behind him so that no one could see what was going on. He left the body on the floor and went to check all of the other rooms in the house to make sure there was no more people or no more witnesses around, because what he's about to do, he didn't want anyone to know or anyone to see. After he checked around the whole house, he couldn't find anyone in any rooms, but he came across the bathroom where he realized this door was locked and he knew there was people behind the bathroom door. Instead of trying to open the door, he got out his shotgun and actually shot straight through the door, and behind the door was 46-year-old Denise Closs and Jayme Closs, the 13-year-old teenage girl. Denise was trying to comfort her daughter Jayme as she was crying really loud, and she was trying to comfort her whilst on the phone with the police making a 911 call, as she knew that something was going on and she heard the gunshots downstairs to her husband. While she was on the phone to the police, she didn't get a chance to talk to the operator or anything like that, but the phone was still connected to the police. And the police heard yelling and shouting from obviously James Patterson, and they heard everything that was going on, the crying from Jayme, and it took a while for them to realize what was going on before the phone was disconnected. The police operators tried calling Denise Closs's phone back multiple times, but it just kept going to voicemail, and she would not answer the phone because something bad has just happened and she was unable to obviously answer the phone. What happened next is shocking and is very, very saddening. James Patterson got duct tape out and tied duct tape around her, Jayme Closs's hands and Jayme Closs's legs, so she couldn't move, and then got a shotgun and then shot her mother, killing her instantly. James Patterson then dragged Jayme Closs out of the house after all this has happened, past both her mother and her father while she was seeing it, and put Jayme Closs, the 13-year-old teenage girl, in the trunk of his car and then drove away. The police then arrived 4 minutes after the 911 call, but at this time it was too late for anything to be done because James Patterson was gone and the mother and father were already gone. Neighbours said they actually did hear the 2 gunshots, but they just dismissed it as around that area was a lot of hunting, so they didn't think anything of it. In fact, these were the sounds of James Patterson killing both Denise and James Closs. James Patterson then drove 70 miles away from the house to Gordon, Wisconsin, to where he was going to hold Jayme Closs captive for a very long time. As soon as he arrived back to his cabin, he took Jayme Closs out of the trunk, put her straight under his bed and his mattress, got changed into his pajamas and made sure all the exits were sealed, and then went to sleep. James Patterson then kept Jayme Closs hostage under his bed for 88 days whilst police were trying to figure out where she had gone and where and who the killer was. After keeping Jayme Closs hostage for over 88 days, he really believed that Jayme Closs was scared of him and she would never act out of the ordinary. She would never try and run away, she'd never go against him, and she definitely would never try and escape because she knows what the consequences would be. He had just killed her mother and his father, and he must have said to her many times, if you try and escape, I will find you and I will come and do the same to you. So she had no way or no feeling, James had no feeling that she would ever try and go against him and escape. During these 88 days, Jayme Closs was also allowed to sometimes sleep on James Patterson's bed if she had behaved in that day. So she didn't always just sleep under the bed, she would always sometimes get on the bed and sleep in the same bed as James Patterson. He never put any special locks on the doors, and it was really kind of a relationship where she would never ever go against him, and James Patterson really thought that she would never try and escape, so he didn't have to put any specific locks on the doors or any bolts, massive bolts, because he truly believed in himself that he'd scared her so much that she would never try and escape. James Patterson would only very rarely let Jayme Closs out of his cabin. A couple of times he let her outside on the garden to just have some brief air, to check by for standbyers, to make sure there was no one around, but he never really let her out the house. She was always kind of captive in that bedroom that she was taken to, and very rarely saw the outside world. On the January 10th, 2019, James Patterson told Jayme Closs that he was going to be leaving the house for a few hours and that she had to stay here and not try anything funny. As per his usual routine, he boxed Jayme Closs under his bed. He made sure all her belongings were stuffed against her and his belongings so she couldn't get out, and also made everything as their usual routine. After these 8 days, they got used to a pattern where she would just accept that when he goes out, she has to go under his bed, and she wasn't allowed to move until he came back. But on this day, Jayme Closs decided to be really brave and decide that enough was enough, and she wanted to get out, and that's exactly what she did. Shortly after James Patterson departed from the house, Jayme Closs decided to push all of the objects blocking her under the bed out of the way so she could go straight outside and get help. She was wearing a very light shirt, leggings, and a pair of James Patterson sneakers. After she escaped the house, she came across a local dog walker, Nutter, who had noticed her from the recent news reports, because this is all over the local area that a girl was being abducted and she was missing. And this dog walker, Nutter, noticed her straight away and was there to help. She immediately took Jayme Closs to her neighbour's house and called the police so they could come and get this sorted straight away. After the neighbours called the police, Jayme Closs decided to reveal everything, how she was kept hostage under the bed, and how she was there for 88 days, and how she was only a few houses away from where they are right now. She also told the neighbours that James Patterson was the murderer of her mother and her father, James and Denise Closs. The police arrived at around 4:45 p.m. where they immediately took Jayme Closs out of the area for her protection. Jayme Closs told the police officers exactly the description of what James Patterson looked like and what vehicle he had, and within minutes the police managed to track him down and find him instantly. As soon as the police officers found James Patterson in his vehicle, he said straight away, "I did it." And the reason why he did this was literally because he saw her on a school bus and he decided that he just wanted to take her. There was no reason for why he chose her. It was just because he saw her get off a school bus and he decided that Jayme Closs was the girl who he wanted to take, and he wanted to kill her parents. James Patterson was charged with 2 cases of first-degree intentional homicide and 1 count of kidnapping. He was given 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole plus 40 years. This story has shocked the world. 2 10-year-old boys abducted a 2-year-old toddler. The 2 10-year-old boys tortured this 2-year-old boy so many ways, and the 2-year-old boy was found split in half on a train line. In today's true crime story, you need to watch to the very end because this is one of the most shockingest stories that has ever happened in the world. On the 12th of February 1993, the 2 10-year-old boys, Robert Thompson and John Venables, were skipping school and they were hanging around in a shopping mall. Apparently the 2 10-year-old boys were looking around the shopping mall looking for a toddler to choose as their target. The 2 10-year-old boys, Robert and John, regularly skipped school. They were always hanging around shopping malls, never really going to school. And today they decided they were going to do something shocking, which really is sickening. Throughout the day on CCTV in the shopping mall, John and Robert were found shoplifting many items from loads of different shops within the shopping centre. They were caught on camera stealing sweets, batteries, a troll doll and a can of blue spray paint. One of the 10-year-old boys actually revealed their plan later on, that their plan was to take a child, take him alongside the shopping centre, heavy traffic, and push him into the oncoming traffic. That was their original plan out of this day. On the same day these 2 boys were at this shopping centre, James Bulger, the 2-year-old boy, was also going there with his mother. They were going to the New Strand shopping centre and they were going to do some shopping as they normally would, mother and son. James Bulger and his mother Denise were on the lower floor of the shopping centre and they was actually in a shop called Tim's Butcher Shop at around 3:40 p.m. As Denise was in the shop, she was going to cash out to pay for obviously whatever she bought in the shop, and she had to let go of her son's hand, James Bulger, to pay obviously for the shopping. At this point, after she let go of his hand for a few minutes, she then realised that her son, James Bulger, was actually missing. This is when Robert Thompson and John Venables actually went into the shop, followed the victim, James Bulger, took his hand and led him outside of the shopping mall without Denise, his mother, even realising. This moment was caught on CCTV at 3:42 p.m, just 2 minutes after they entered the shop. Robert Thompson and John Venables took James Bulger to the Liverpool Canal just around the corner from the shopping centre. It was roughly around a quarter of a mile away, and they were at this local canal, which is the Leeds and Liverpool Canal, and they were planning on doing something very bad, and this is where the story gets very sad, so please be aware. At this canal, Robert Thompson and John Venables proceeded to drop James Bulger on his head, the 2-year-old boy, and they were joking and laughing about it and saying they were going to push him into the canal, and that was the way they were going to take his life, was pushing him into this canal and supposedly making him drown. There was actually an eyewitness that said they saw James Bulger with the 2 boys crying his eyes out around the time. They then took James Bulger over 2.5 miles around Liverpool. So the 2 boys, Robert and John, took the little toddler for a 2.5 mile walk to see what the next thing was going to be. What else could they do to this poor child? In fact, there were over 38 eyewitnesses who actually saw them going for a walk. Most of them was just bystanders, and not many people really said anything. But there were 2 people who did actually challenge them and ask them what was going on. Somebody actually challenged the 2 boys and asked them what was going on, and Robert and John Venables both said that this was their little brother and he was lost and they were going to the police station. So the people who obviously asked them that just believed them and let them carry on to the police station, with the pure intention, them knowing that that wasn't really the reason. They were about to commit something much, much worse. Eventually, they actually ended up in Walton, where just across the road was actually Walton Lane Police Station, and they were hesitant to what they were going to do next. They wasn't really sure what they were going to do, but they knew deep down that whatever they were going to do was going to be evil, and this next bit really was evil. Robert Thompson and John Venables took James Bulger up a steep hill towards a railway line, which is actually Walton and Anfield's official train station. What happened now is really saddening. They actually used the blue spray paint they got from the shopping mall earlier that day, which they'd stolen, and one of the boys sprayed it into James Bulger's eye. They stamped on him, kicked him, and then threw bricks at his head. They then used the batteries they had also stolen and put them in his mouth, and apparently they even put them up somewhere else, which you don't really want to know. The 2 boys then got a 10 kg fish plate and dropped it on James Bulger, which really did damage him. Because of this 10 kg bar, he actually resulted in 10 skull fractures to his head. Pathologist Alan Williams said that he had so many injuries, 42 to be exact, that not one of them could have been decided as the one that officially killed James Bulger. Robert Thompson and John Venables were panicking now. They just realised they really hurt this 2-year-old toddler, and they did not want to get the blame. They wanted to make it look like the death of James Bulger was going to be an accident, because they didn't want to get blamed for this, even though they've just committed horrible crimes and they are 2 dangerous children. They didn't want to get blamed for this. So what they did now was try to cover up and make it look like James Bulger had an accidental death. Robert Thompson and John Venables laid James Bulger's body across the train line and rubbled his head to the train tracks in a hope that a train would hit James Bulger and make this look like an accident. After the 2 boys left the scene, it's sad to say that James Bulger's body was split into 2 from this train, which is just horrible. Like, these 2 children, they're 10 years old, could commit such a horrible crime, and this poor little 2-year-old boy had gone through so much. He was just going out for a shopping trip with his mother. He had no idea this was going to happen, and his poor mother Denise had no idea either where her son was. And he was beaten, sprayed in the eyes, and then split in half by a train. It's even worse because a few days later, James Bulger's body was actually found by 2 other children on the train track, in half. A forensic pathologist did actually confirm that James Bulger was already dead before the train hit him, and the injuries he'd suffered before he was put on the train tracks was enough to kill him. The 2 boys also did many other things to this 2-year-old toddler, James Bulger, such as many things I can't really say on this video. They pulled his trousers down, they did many other disgusting activities to a 2-year-old boy, and police forensics did find evidence of them actually doing really horrible things to a 2-year-old. And again, I don't want to say this on this video because it's disgusting, but I'm sure you can figure out what that might be. The 2 boys were actually questioned about this, and they were reluctant to give any details of what happened on this day. The police went to the local shopping mall and got CCTV footage of everything they needed. They have footage of the 2 boys taking the child, they have footage of him coming out of the shopping mall, and they have a lot of witnesses and everything they need to be able to charge these 2 boys with murder. This case was very unusual because this is the youngest murderers ever in the world, and this made shocking headlines, and everybody was really shocked about how 2 10-year-old boys could even think of doing this. On the 24th of November 1993, the 2 10-year-old boys were now actually 11 years old. They've just aged up, and they were convicted as the 2 youngest murder offences of the 20th century, and they were found guilty of murder. And the craziest part about this story is in 2001, when they were both 18 years old, they both were released from jail and are now in the world with new identities, and no one knows who they are. So they are still out there right now. They went to jail until they were 18 years old, so they are there 8 years in jail, or 7 years in jail, and now they're free. They've took this poor boy's life, poor family's life, and they're freed into the universe with fake identities, and no one knows who they are. This 12-year-old girl killed her 8-year-old brother, her mother, and her father for one very weird reason. Today's true story is one of the most disturbing cases ever, and you're not gonna believe the end of the story. This is Jayme Richardson. She is a 12-year-old girl, and she's from Medicine Hat, Canada. Jayme's mother was called Deborah Richardson, and her father was called Mark Richardson. Her parents described Jayme as a fun, ethnic girl. She was always happy, very jolly as a young girl in her upbringing. She never really did anything wrong. She was always well behaved, until she turned to about 10 or 11 years old, where she started becoming a bit of a goth. By the early ages of 11, she started dressing more like a goth, she started doing her makeup more like a goth, and her whole personality kind of changed more to become a goth. She even would go to punk rock shows and everything kind of in that community. One day she actually decided to go to a punk rock show where she actually met a fellow person who really enjoyed the music too. His name was Jeremy, and he was 23 years old, 11 years older than Jayme Richardson. After she went to this punk rock show and she met Jeremy, she became even more of a goth. She even signed up to a website called vampirefreaks.com. She was obsessed with trying to make herself look a lot older than she was. She'd start wearing dark makeup and start dressing very older, so people would assume she was way older than 12 years old. She really got involved in this whole goth phase, and it was also part of Jeremy. Jeremy was a very big goth, and she wanted to be more like him, so she started dressing up, wearing darker makeup, and she was always going on his website, vampirefreaks.com, and joining in on that community. Now, in fact, Jeremy's upbringing, the 23-year-old, was very bad. His mother was an alcoholic, and his father abused him. And when he was at school, he got bullied a lot, he got picked on all the time, and he even attempted suicide at one point in his life. So his upbringing was not good, and this could explain maybe potentially why what is about to happen. Jeremy, by the age of 13, described himself as a 300-year-old werewolf. He started similar age as Jayme, started wearing dark clothing, became a goth, got into the goth scene, and yeah, he started wearing dark makeup, dark clothing, and basically called himself a 300-year-old werewolf. Now, when Jayme's parents, Deborah and Mark, found out about this relationship that had been bonding, their closeness, their friendship, she'd been hanging around with this 23-year-old guy, they instantly said she cannot see him no more. He's too old, there's a massive age gap, it's not morally right to be hanging around with a 23-year-old when you're 12. And also, he wasn't a good example on her. They said that she started becoming a bit more different in her personality, her attitude towards things. So they prohibited Jayme from seeing him. They said, you're not allowed to see him. They didn't like him. They made that very clear that he's not a good person for some reason. And they actually grounded Jayme from going out, completely not allowed to see this guy ever again. Now, the problem was Jeremy and Jayme were actually in love. They have a relationship. They were genuinely in love with each other. And Jeremy was not happy with Jayme's parents that she was not allowed to see him. He felt discriminated against. He was really, really angry at her parents. and he actually wrote this on a blog article. On April 3rd, 2006, he wrote, "Payment. My lovers' rents are totally unfair. They say that they really care. They don't know what is going on, they just assume. Their throats I want to slit. Finally there shall be silence. Their blood shall be payment." This is what he wrote on a blog article after he found out that he was no longer allowed to see Jayme. Now many people say that obviously Jayme here is basically saying he wants to kill Jayme's parents because she's not allowed to see him. They blocked his love out of his life. He wants revenge. He wants to kill her parents. But in fact, actually, later on in the story, the police reports show that actually it wasn't Jayme who wanted to kill her parents. It was actually Jayme herself. She had a plan that she wanted to commit murder to her whole family, including her 8-year-old brother, her mother, and her dad. She actually sent an email to Jayme, which the police found on a computer, saying, "It begins with killing my family and it ends with me living with you." Now this is where the story gets really twisted and weird, and I feel really bad. My thoughts go out to the whole family and anyone surrounded in this situation. But Jayme actually replied to her email saying, "I love your idea, but we need to get this into more detail." They both agreed that they were going to kill her family, and they wanted to get it in perfect detail, exactly how they were going to do it, what they're going to use, where they're going to do it. They wanted to know the whole plan. This 12-year-old girl and this 23-year-old male were going to kill her family. She was too young to probably really understand properly what she was about to do, but she was about to commit the biggest murder ever. Supposedly, Jayme also told all of her friends that she was actually going to do it. Apparently at school, she told all of her friends that she was going to murder her family. Her friends never believed her. They thought she was just joking around. But she was being honest. She full on wanted to kill her family, and she told all of her friends. None of them believed her. They didn't really say anything. But she was being serious, and she is about to do this. The night before the murder was committed, they both were together and they watched Natural Born Killers. Some believe that this was the instinct to give them that push to actually commit this murder from watching a show about killing and murders, and they watched this show the night before they went to do the hideous murder they were about to commit. And then on April 3rd, 2006, this was the night where Jayme and Jayme were going to continue to do their plan and murder Jayme's mother, father, and 8-year-old brother. In this quiet neighborhood, they went on with a plan, and you won't believe what happened next. On that night, Jayme's mother, Deborah, heard a noise downstairs, and that was actually Jayme. He had a mask on and a knife, and he stabbed Deborah 12 times. Jayme's father, Mark, heard the noise downstairs and instantly rushed down to see what was going on. And he actually saw what was going on, and he got a tool to try and get rid of Jayme, try and beat him out of the house. And then Jayme actually stabbed Mark 24 times. Now Jayme's little 8-year-old brother, Jacob, was in the house at the time. He heard everything that was going on, all the screaming, all the shouting. He was in bed, and he actually went to hide in his bedroom. He went to hide because he was panicking, he was scared. The poor little boy was petrified. And his older sister Jayme went up the stairs. Jayme went up the stairs after killing the mother and the father and stabbed him 5 times, and also put a knife to his throat. And the poor boy, honestly, my thoughts go out. The reason she killed her 8-year-old brother as well was because supposedly she said her mother and her father were gone, so he had no one left, so she may as well kill him as well because he would have no one left. Jacob's friend lived a few houses down, and he actually went over there the same night that this happened to ask if he wanted to come out and play. He came to the house and looked through the window and actually saw everything that had happened. The bodies, the murder scene. This poor little boy, Jacob's friend, who was also 8 years old, came up to the house and saw the whole thing, which would have petrified him and scared him and tortured him for life. So he ran back home, told his parents, they rang the police. Within 24 hours, the police had came back, found Jayme and arrested him. Jayme was sent to prison, and he had 3 life sentences for first-degree murder. Jayme was also guilty of first-class murder, and she had 3 accounts of that as well, but she only actually got 10 years in jail, and she's been out of jail since 2016. So she is now back out in this world with a new identity, and no one knows where she is. She's a free girl. She's killed her whole family, her brother, her mother, and her dad, and she's out in this world. She got 10 years. Jayme got 3 life sentences, so he's still in jail now and will be for the rest of his life. Whereas Jayme, which no one knows her new name, no one knows where she is, she got released in 2016, never to be seen again, and is back out in the free world. after killing the whole family. This is this crazy story of Jayme Richardson, and like I said, my thoughts go out to the family. This is one of the twisted, most horriblest stories I've ever covered, and I really do feel bad for everybody who was involved and anyone who had seen this scene. This is the disturbing story about Jeffrey Dahmer, who committed 17 murders between 1978 and 1991 and nearly got away with every single one of them. Not only did he murder his victims, he actually kept the body parts of each victim he killed and kept their bones, their bodies and their heads in his freezer and his drawers throughout the whole period. Jeffrey Dahmer was born on May 21st, 1960. His mother was called Joyce and his father was called Lionel. Jeffrey Dahmer was described as a very fun, energetic and happy child. He was always lifting people's moods up and was always ready to play around with toys and always just a really good child. But just before his 4th birthday, he actually had a double hernia surgery. After this surgery, Jeffrey became a bit more shy. I think the surgery might have knocked his confidence a bit, and he became a quiet, shy young boy. After his surgery, he became weirdly obsessed with dead animals. His father actually one day brought in some dead animals from the roadside and showed Jeffrey how to basically pull the bones out and dissect them. And Jeffrey took a really weird addiction to doing this. In fact, he loved it so much that he started doing it himself. He started finding all these dead animals on the side of the road. He started getting their bodies in effectively and putting out their bones, seeing where all the bones were, the hearts, the livers, everything about these animals. He was dissecting at such a young age, just after his surgery, and his father showed him exactly how to do it, exactly how to do all the things, how to dissect the part, everything, which is just weird for, in my opinion, a child to do at such a young age. Now, his dad Lionel actually said that Jeffrey was obsessed with the sound of bones moving, and he used to call them fiddlesticks, and he was obsessed with getting bones out of animals constantly and, you know, cleaning them and moving them around, which is why a lot of people think this is what started the whole initiation of what's about to come in the story. Every single day, Jeffrey would go out of his house, underneath the house, and find even more animals to dissect. It became a hobby, an obsession, and a weird craving to get more and more bones from the roadside animals. Jeffrey's mum didn't really approve of this, but she tried doing it to kind of bond with the child. But yeah, Lionel was the one who kind of got him into the dissecting the bodies, his father, and as he grew up, it kind of got worse. By the age of 14, he actually started drinking beer every single day and night. He was an alcoholic at the age of 14. His upbringing was beer. He used to take beer to school, he used to take beer everywhere he went. In fact, one day he actually took beer to school and the students asked him, "Why have you got beer?" And he told all of the students and his friends, all the people in his class, that it was his medicine and he really needed it. And yeah, he would drink all day, all night. He was only 14 years old and he was pretty much an alcoholic at this stage in his life. But he found out something else about himself as well, which he was in massive denial about. When Jeffrey reached puberty, he actually realized that he was gay. I think he was in a bit of denial for a long time. He didn't want to tell his parents, Lionel or Joyce. He wanted to keep it quiet. Even his father realized a few times that, you know, he hasn't ever really talked about girls, and he's never really kind of had any girls over or any girlfriends or anything like that. And Jeffrey knew he was gay, but he didn't want to tell anyone about it, and he wanted to keep it to himself. And this is where it also was mixed in with controlling behavior. He started becoming controlling over males. He liked the idea of being dominant. He liked the idea of controlling other men to an extent of where they literally cannot move or cannot say anything back. In some of his relationships with men or friends, he didn't like their answers if they wasn't agreeing with him. He had to have the right answer. If they ever went against his answer, he would get angry, and he liked to be dominant. His behavior was switching, and some say this was to do with the drinking, some say this is to do with just the way he was brought up, some say this is to do with the surgery he had. Either way, he became very controlling and weirdly obsessively controlling. By his later teens, he started actually becoming obsessed with flesh and blood. Instead of being fantasizing about women or males, he actually fantasized about flesh from animals or anyone really. Just flesh in general is something what he got a hit off from. So that was his obsession, flesh and the sounds of flesh from animals. And actually he had some dreams at night Instead of having dreams about women or males, he actually had dreams about flesh and bones. It's fair to say he got his arousement from flesh. After growing up more, this is where it turns for the worse. He actually starts then murdering people. He went from animals to dissecting animals to bones to then murders. And his first murder, which I'm about to tell you, was supposedly an accident, but it went on 17 more times. Jeffrey graduated on June 18th in 1978, and 3 weeks later he committed his first murder. When Jeffrey was driving every day, he kept seeing the same hitchhiker over and over again with his top off. He was getting weirdly obsessed with this same guy, and eventually he was driving by one day and he saw the hitchhiker on the side of the road. The hitchhiker was wanting to go to some sort of festival / party, and Jeffrey was driving by. The hitchhiker basically asked him if he could hop in the lift and he could take him there, but Jeffrey didn't want to take him there straight away. He asked him if he would come back to his house and have some beers, smoke some weed, lift some weights. And the guy said, yeah, sure, as long as you take me after, we can chill out for a bit. You know, I don't know who you are, but it'd be cool to get to know you. So Jeffrey took him back to his house. They started lifting weights, they started drinking beers. Everyone was going fine until it became a bit more weird. Jeffrey he tried it on with the guy firstly. He tried kissing him, and the guy didn't like that. He said he doesn't swing that way, and he's been here for like a couple of hours now, and he's really starting to wonder if Jeffrey's even going to take him to this event. And Jeffrey actually didn't want him to leave. The guy asked him, can we go now? And he said, no, I'm not going to take you. I want you to stay with me. Like, really weird behavior. As the guy went to the left, he got his weight and whacked him round the head, knocking him straight to the floor, struggling for his breath. After he was on the floor, he didn't really believe he was dying. He thought he was messing around. So he went down to try and help the guy. The guys tried to strangle him, so he finished his life off by strangling him, basically. And after he actually did strangle him, he started kissing him and fantasizing over the person he just killed. The person he just killed was called Stephen Hicks, and he took the body to under his house basement and left him there for a few days. He then came back, took the body and chopped the body up into many parts, his hands, his arms, his head, multiple parts, and he wanted to dissect the body. He put the body in his shallow graveyard around his house because it wasn't enough for it to be buried properly, so he just buried it shallowly and came back a few weeks later and actually brought the body back, put acid all over the body so he could smash the bones up and then spread the body over his garden. He claims this was accidental, but as you can probably imagine, this doesn't sound very accidental to me. He didn't then commit a murder for a very long time. In fact, he became more well behaved supposedly, until he then committed another murder, which he says was also an accident. On November 20th, 1987, Jeffrey was living with his grandma and he decided to go out one evening to the bar. I think it was actually a gay bar, and he went out, danced with loads of people, and he came across a guy. The guy was 25 years old. He was also out on a night out. They were both enjoying themselves, both drinking. They both became very attracted to each other, and so Jeffrey took him to a hotel room. Once he took him to the hotel room, Jeffrey had a way of drugging these people by putting stuff in their drink, sleeping pills, etc. And Jeffrey actually accidentally drugged himself this night. Instead of giving the drink with the stuff into the guy, he actually gave it to himself. Luckily for him, supposedly it wore off quite quickly, and then he managed to give the stuff to the other guy who was just taken back to his room. So he drugged himself, and then he drugged his friend who he was with, who we met on that night out. They danced all night. They may have made some love, I don't really know for sure. It doesn't really say too much detail about that. But yeah, they basically did whatever in that hotel room, and then they both woke up in the morning extremely unsure of what happened last night. When Jeffrey woke up, he saw that the 25-year-old was basically top and tailing him in the bed. His feet were where his head is, and they were upside down. He turned around and he realized that the 25-year-old male was actually dead, with loads of scars all over his body, a wound to his head. And Jeffrey quickly realized that he must have killed him. Like, he was out of control, he was drunk, you know, he must have killed him. So he didn't know what to do with his body. He basically went and got a suitcase, took the body in the suitcase, took it back to his grandma's house, dissected that body as well with acid, and cut his arms off, his head off, and then he kept the head of this person in a box in his room at his grandma's house for many, many months. From here onwards, he became obsessed with doing the same technique. He would go out to a night out, he'd go out to a bar, he would find someone he really liked the look of or was obsessed with, and he would ask them to come back to his house. He would then put stuff in their drink so they would go to sleep, and then he would begin to do his thing. He would continue to kill them, and he would cut them up, use acid, kept doing all these things. And this was at the time he was at his grandma's house. So at his grandma's house, he was doing all this stuff. His grandma did become a bit wary of this. She heard things going on, but she never really knew exactly because it was downstairs in the basement and she couldn't get down the steps there. So yeah, so basically he did the same to this guy, and he kept doing it over and over again to multiple people between his 20s and his 30s. From 1978 to 1991, he did this over 16 times to 16 different people. Throughout the process, he did actually move out to his own flat, where things got even worse. He moved out of his grandma's at one point, went to his own house, or his own apartment, and he started doing it there as well. The same technique pretty much. Even when he was in his apartment on his south, his neighbors also smelled bad things. But weirdly, he never got caught. Many victims and many people were ringing up, victims' families were ringing up saying that their son or the person's missing. His neighbors kept reporting him for weird smells. But weirdly, for this whole time, he managed to get away with everything. Like, no one ever questioned him. There was a few times where he nearly got caught. The police went to his house many times for reports, but they just never really did anything. They just allowed it, you know, almost the fact that the people he was with, they just assumed that he was gay and they were gay, and they would just having arguments or something. You know, there was screaming heard, there was loads of things, different things always reported from his neighbors, smells, arguments, shouting. He got away with it every single time, and he committed up to 17 murders up until from 1978 to 1991. But Jeffrey's luck was about to run out because he'd gone on a massive killing spree, a severely saddening killing spree, and his time was about to be up. He tried to do one more murder, and it didn't go as planned. On July 21st, 1991, he went out again to a bar, and he came across 3 men, and he was planning on doing the same thing again. The same thing he's been doing for many years previous. He went out to the bar, found somebody he liked, invited them back to the room, but this time things didn't go as planned. The guy actually managed to escape, and he did manage to actually get away. And just as he managed to get away, he managed to go outside and find police. The police went there to his room, and they didn't believe what the guy was saying. They didn't believe this guy was trying to kill him. Even though he was running down the street saying, help me, help me, help me, because he just escaped Jeffrey's apartment. The police went to his house. They didn't really, or his apartment, they didn't really believe at this point what the guy was saying, the guy who just escaped. They just thought that, again, it was an argument or something like that. They really turned a blind eye to Jeffrey all the time. Although he was reported many times for many crimes, they just didn't see him as a serial killer. They never thought he killed people, until this happened. When the police went back to his apartment with the person who just ran away, they went inside and asked to look around. You know, Jeffrey turned it down. He said, look, we just had an argument. The guy was saying no, he tried to kill him. Jeffrey was saying no, I didn't. So the police asked to come into his apartment. When they did come into his apartment, they looked around, they couldn't find anything really, until they went into his drawer and found photos of all of his dissected people. All the people he's dissected, all the people he's killed, he took a photo of every single one. That was one of the ways he lured people back, and it was to offer them money for photos and for beer. He took a photo of every single person he killed, and this is a big sign for the police to arrest him straight away. After they did arrest him, they found many skeletons in his apartment, heads in the fridge, arms, bodies. He had a bunker in his actual apartment full of acid, which he would use to strip flesh off people's bodies and get the bones out. And this explains why late at night he was drilling, cutting, shouting. All he was doing was basically bringing people back to his room for many years, spiking them, spiking their drinks. Then late at night he would cut them up, use acid to basically get the flesh off their body, and then he would dispose of the bones and keep some, keep the skulls, keep the arms, keep the legs. Some cases keep the heads intact with cling film over them in his fridge and his freezer, so he could just look at them, which is just weird. And this is what his obsession was. So at this point, Jeffrey was finally arrested, and he was proven to have many evidence in his apartment of doing this. This court case went on for a very long time because they had so much overwhelmed of the things they've just found in his apartment, from bones to skeletons to photos. They didn't know half the people he had murdered. They didn't, because again, most of the bones were already gone. So they didn't even know how, out of the 17 people, not all of them was even discovered. Some of them still not being discovered now, because what he did with his bones, no one will ever know. On January 30th, 1992, nearly a year after he got arrested, he was told by his lawyers to plead insanity so he could spend the rest of his life in hospital, not jail. Jeffrey said to his lawyers that he isn't insane and he knew what he was doing. So he tried pleading insanity, but that didn't go down in the courts. They didn't believe that, and in fact he did actually get sentenced. The court found him guilty of 15 cases of murder. He was sentenced to 15 years of life sentences, which works out to be 957 years in prison. But the craziest thing is he didn't serve those 957 years in prison. 3 years after he was actually in jail, he was actually murdered by somebody inside. The person was called Christopher Scarver, and one day when the guards wasn't looking, he got a metal bar, smacked him around the head and beat him up brutally. Although he wasn't dead immediately, when he got to hospital, he was pronounced dead. And this was the end of Jeffrey Dahmer. This is one of the most shocking and most disturbing stories I've ever seen ever. And if you guys want to watch the full series of this, it just released it on Netflix, and I trust me guys, this is one of the best documented series you'll ever see. It really sends the shivers down your spine because it's so disturbing. So if you can watch it, I would recommend watching it because it does everything I've just said in like a 10-hour series. So if you want to watch it, go watch it right now. And make sure you subscribe for more true crime stories.